All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive on something a little different.
Okay.
It's this concept called WETIKO.
Mm-hmm.
And full disclosure, I had never even heard of this before. I stumbled across this YouTube video by this guy, Dubious Monk.
Yeah.
And he describes it as this, like, contagious psycho-spiritual disease of the soul.
Oh, wow.
Which...
It's pretty intense.
Yeah, it definitely piqued my interest. So I was like, okay, we gotta explore this more.
Yeah, what is this WETIKO thing?
Yeah, you ever heard of this?
I've heard the term before.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But, that description definitely grabs your attention.
Yeah.
It makes you think like, oh, is this like some kind of horror movie situation?
Right.
But it's actually a lot deeper than that.
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there about the human psyche and how our behavior can be influenced.
Okay, so psycho-spiritual disease of the soul, I mean, that's a mouthful.
It is.
He also uses terms like mind virus and collective psychosis in the video, which are kind of unsettling, honestly.
Yeah, those are some loaded terms.
Where do we even begin with all this?
Well, it might help to think of it in terms of something called autonomous complexes.
Okay.
Which is like a concept from Jungian psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And these are basically like little pockets of energy in our unconscious minds.
Okay.
They can take on a life of their own.
So like a hidden program running in the background of our brains.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay.
You can almost think of it like a computer virus, but for your mind.
Right.
It can kind of take over your thoughts and make you act in ways that you wouldn't normally.
Yeah.
And some people think that WETIKO is like that, but on a much larger scale, like impacting entire societies.
Okay, so that's starting to make a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
But how does this mind virus actually manifest itself? Like, what does it look like in the real world?
Well, the video gives a really interesting example.
Okay.
Imagine like a happy couple at a party.
Okay.
They're having a great time.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they get into this huge fight over something totally insignificant.
Oh, I've totally seen that. Like, it's like a switch flips.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of a sudden, all this anger and resentment just comes pouring out.
It's like, where did that come from?
Yeah, it's like they completely lose it over something that wouldn't normally even faze them.
Yeah, and that's one way that WETIKO can manifest.
Okay.
It feeds on those negative emotions.
Interesting.
The anger, the fear, the resentment. It takes those little sparks of negativity and blows them up into a raging fire.
So it's almost like WETIKO is like a parasite that's thriving on our negative energy?
That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is that WETIKO can actually take on different forms.
Oh, really?
Depending on the person and the situation. So it plays on our individual fears and insecurities.
Okay.
And it exploits whatever makes us feel most vulnerable.
So for one person, it might be the fear of losing their job. For another, it might be the fear of being alone or something.
Exactly. The details might differ, but the underlying mechanism is the same.
Right.
It's about tapping into those primal fears that drive us to act in ways that are ultimately harmful to ourselves and others.
So this is starting to get kind of creepy.
Yeah, a little bit.
But you said it can play on our individual fears.
Right.
Does that mean that it can also operate on like a societal level?
Yeah, definitely.
Exploiting our collective fears and anxieties?
Absolutely. That's a key point that the video explores.
Okay.
Especially in the context of the current political climate in the U.S. WETIKO thrives on division.
Right.
And fear of the other.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's something that we see a lot of these days.
So how does WETIKO play into this whole, like, political division thing?
Well, think about how WETIKO operates. It feeds on fear and division, right?
Yeah.
So when we get caught up in those us versus them narratives, when we start demonizing people who hold different political views.
Yeah. Right. We're essentially playing right into WETIKO's hands.
So we're giving it more power by buying into those divisive narratives.
That's the idea. We become so focused on fighting each other that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
We lose our ability to think critically and to empathize with those who see things differently.
It's almost like WETIKO's a puppet master and we're the puppets.
It's a powerful analogy.
Yeah.
And the scariest part is that a lot of people don't even realize they're being manipulated.
Right.
They think they're acting rationally, but their thoughts and their actions are actually being influenced by this underlying force.
That's kind of scary.
It is a little bit.
So you're saying even if we don't buy into this idea of WETIKO as like a literal entity or whatever,
right,
it's still a useful concept for understanding how fear and division can drive us to do things that are harmful.
Absolutely.
To ourselves and to others.
Whether we call it WETIKO or the shadow or ego or something else entirely.
The fact remains that there are these forces within us and within our society that can lead us down a path of destruction if we're not careful.
Okay, so this is pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah.
But before we totally spiral into despair here, let's talk about solutions.
Okay.
The video mentions ways that we can fight back against WETIKO.
It does.
So how do we do that?
Well, that's where things start to get really interesting.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, I'm ready for part 2.
Let's do it.
All right, so we've established this WETIKO thing. It's pretty sneaky.
Yeah.
Can pop up in all sorts of places. So how do we actually start fighting back against it?
Right.
It feels kind of overwhelming, to be honest.
It's understandable to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You know, just recognizing there's a problem can be daunting.
Right.
But it's the first step.
Okay.
And Dubious Monk really emphasizes that in the video.
Yeah.
Awareness is key. You know, it's like shining a light on a dark corner. Suddenly you can see what you're dealing with.
So step 1 is just being aware that WETIKO might be influencing us.
Right.
But what comes after that?
Okay, so
how do we actually stop feeding the mind virus?
The video highlights several practices that can help us become more resilient to WETIKO's influence.
Okay.
One of the most powerful is mindfulness.
Mindfulness?
Yeah.
That gets thrown around a lot these days.
It does.
What does that actually mean in this context?
Well, it's about paying attention to your thoughts and feelings without judgment.
Okay.
Noticing when you're getting caught up in those negative fear-based narratives that WETIKO thrives on.
So instead of just blindly reacting to those thoughts and feelings, we take a step back and observe them.
Exactly. You become like a scientist observing an experiment. You notice the thought, you acknowledge the feeling, but you don't get swept away by it.
That sounds easier said than done.
It does.
Especially when you're in the heat of the moment and emotions are running high.
Yeah, for sure. It takes practice. But the more you do it, the easier it becomes.
So it's like anything else, practice makes perfect.
Right. And the video offers some really practical tips for cultivating mindfulness.
Okay. Like what?
Well, one simple practice is to just take a few deep breaths whenever you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed.
Okay.
It might sound basic,
yeah,
but it can really help to ground you in the present moment.
Right.
And interrupt that cycle of negative thinking.
Okay, that's something I can definitely try.
Yeah.
What are some other practices?
Another powerful practice is gratitude.
Gratitude. How does that help fight off a mind virus?
Well, when we focus on what we're grateful for, it shifts our perspective.
Okay.
It helps us to see the good in ourselves and in the world around us, even when things are tough.
Right.
And that's a powerful antidote to WETIKO's negativity.
So it's like choosing to focus on the light instead of the darkness.
Exactly.
I like that.
It's about intentionally shifting your attention away from the things that are making you feel fearful or anxious and towards the things that bring you joy and peace.
Okay. Are there other strategies that he mentions?
Yeah, Dubious Monk also talks about the importance of cultivating healthy relationships.
Okay.
WETIKO thrives on isolation and division.
Right.
So surrounding yourself with people who support and uplift you is crucial.
That makes sense. When you feel connected and loved, it's harder for those negative voices to take hold.
Exactly. And it's not just about receiving support, it's also about giving support to others. When we act with kindness and compassion, we're essentially starving WETIKO.
Okay.
And feeding the forces of love and connection.
So it sounds like fighting WETIKO is about so much more than just meditating or practicing gratitude.
Right.
It's about fundamentally changing the way we interact with ourselves and with the world around us.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating a mindset of awareness, compassion, and personal responsibility.
Okay, this all sounds good in theory.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm still a little skeptical.
Sure.
Is this stuff really effective?
It's a fair question.
I mean, can simply practicing gratitude really make a difference when you're talking about something as powerful as WETIKO?
The video acknowledges that there's no quick fix.
Right.
No magic bullet that will instantly eradicate WETIKO
Of course.
from our lives.
Right.
It's an ongoing process of awareness, growth, and transformation.
So it's not about achieving some perfect state of enlightenment where we're immune to all negativity.
Exactly.
It's about showing up every day and making conscious choices.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that we're all works in progress.
Okay.
And we're all going to stumble and fall from time to time.
Yeah, for sure.
The important thing is to keep getting back up, keep learning, keep growing, and keep choosing love over fear.
That reminds me of something else he talks about in the video.
What's that?
The importance of taking personal responsibility.
Yes, he really emphasizes that. You know, we have to stop blaming external forces for our problems.
Right.
And start owning our own thoughts, feelings, and actions.
So instead of saying, WETIKO is making me do this, right,
we say, I am choosing to think and act this way.
Precisely.
Okay.
When we take responsibility for our choices, we reclaim our power. We stop being victims of circumstance and become creators of our own reality.
That's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
But how does taking responsibility actually help us fight WETIKO? Well, when we're stuck in a victim mentality, we feel powerless to change our situation.
Right.
We feel like we're at the mercy of external forces.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the kind of mindset that WETIKO thrives on.
So when we feel powerless, we give WETIKO more power.
Exactly. But when we step into a creator mentality, we recognize that we have the power to choose how we respond to any given situation. We can choose to feed WETIKO with our fear and negativity.
Right.
Or we can choose to star it by cultivating love, compassion, and understanding.
So even in the face of challenging circumstances, we always have a choice.
Always. And the more we exercise that choice, the stronger we become.
Okay.
It's like working out a muscle. The more we practice choosing love over fear, the easier it becomes.
So it's not just about fighting some external evil.
Right.
It's also about cultivating inner strength and resilience.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
The stronger and healthier we are internally, the better equipped we are to resist WETIKO's attempts to hijack our minds and emotions.
Right.
Dubious Monk even talks about it like strengthening your mental immune system.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So we're building up our defenses so we're less susceptible to those mind viruses.
Exactly. And, you know, it's not just about individual work.
Right.
It's also about creating a culture of empathy and understanding.
Yeah. He talks about like engaging in open and honest conversations with friends, family, even people we disagree with.
Exactly.
Creating spaces where we can talk about our fears and anxieties, but also our hopes and dreams for a better future.
Right, and that's where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah.
What if instead of feeding WETIKO with our fear and division, we could actually starve it?
Yeah.
By cultivating compassion, understanding, and a sense of shared humanity.
Okay, now that's a challenge I can get behind. But how do we go about, okay, so we talked about how to recognize WETIKO and how to fight back against it.
Right.
But I'm curious about its origins. Like, where did this whole idea even come from?
Yeah.
WETIKO. I mean, it sounds like something out of a fantasy novel.
It actually originates from the Cree and other Algonquin-speaking Native American tribes.
Oh, really?
And for them, WETIKO wasn't just a metaphor. It was an actual entity.
Okay.
A cannibalistic spirit that preyed on human weakness and greed.
A cannibalistic spirit.
Yeah.
It's pretty intense.
It is.
So was this like a boogeyman story that they would tell people to like keep them in line or something?
Well, it was definitely more than just a scary story.
Okay.
They saw WETIKO as a very real threat to the well-being of individuals and the entire community. And what's interesting is that many indigenous cultures around the world have similar concepts. Ideas about negative energies or entities that can influence people and cause harm.
So this idea of a mind virus or something that preys on our negativity isn't unique to Native American culture.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It seems to be like a recurring theme across many different cultures and time periods.
That makes you wonder why we haven't been paying more attention to these warnings.
Yeah, maybe it's easier to just dismiss them as superstition or mythology.
Right.
Or maybe facing the reality of WETIKO is just too uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of wisdom in these ancient traditions. They understood the human psyche and the forces that can influence our behavior on a very deep level.
You know, thinking about these ancient cultures trying to warn us about WETIKO,
Yeah.
it reminds me of all those sci-fi movies where humanity ignores the warnings about some impending disaster and then boom, it all goes wrong.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And in a way, we are facing a kind of disaster right now.
Right.
With all the division and negativity in the world. But like in those movies, we still have time to change course.
Okay, so what can we learn from these indigenous cultures that can help us combat WETIKO in the modern world?
Well, many of their traditions emphasize the importance of community, connection with nature, and living in balance with the world around us. And these are values that have been largely lost in our modern individualistic society.
So maybe part of the solution is to rediscover those values.
Yeah.
And try to integrate them back into our lives.
I think that's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And it connects back to what we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Cultivating mindfulness, gratitude, compassion.
Right.
Those practices help us to shift our focus away from the things that feed WETIKO and towards the things that nourish our souls.
It sounds like fighting WETIKO is ultimately about creating a more loving and harmonious world.
Yeah.
Both within ourselves and in our communities.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And it all starts with awareness. Once we recognize the influence of WETIKO, we can start to make conscious choices that counteract its negativity.
So to our listeners, we leave you with this question.
Okay.
Now that you're aware of WETIKO, where do you see its influence in your own life or the world around you? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it?
And we encourage you to check out the Dubious Monk video we discussed today.
Yeah.
It's a great starting point for understanding this complex concept. He also mentions the work of Paul Levey, who has written extensively about WETIKO.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of WETIKO.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating conversation.
I hope you learned something new and maybe even gained some tools for navigating the challenges of our modern world.
Yeah, me too.
Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember,
yes,
you have the power to choose love over fear.